It was Tuesday, December 2nd, one of those days that should have passed without a single ripple inside the federal system. Tuesdays are predictable. Judges follow tight schedules. Courtrooms hum through routine dockets. Prison transports run on rails. Nothing extraordinary, nothing explosive. But on this Tuesday, long before sunrise, something inside the Bureau of Prisons snapped. A crisis that had been quietly building for 9 days suddenly detonated, all because of two silent, grainy clips the public was never supposed to see. Clips that showed Shawn Diddy Combs moving inside FCI Fort Dix with a level of freedom no inmate, especially a high-profile one, should ever have. And the moment those clips leaked, everything started shifting. Not instantly, not loudly, but slowly at first, like a hairline crack forming in glass. Back on November 23rd, when the first footage surfaced online, most people didn't even understand what they were looking at. It lasted only a few seconds. A still camera somewhere behind the media library shelves capturing Diddy adjusting his jacket in a restricted room he should never have accessed alone. No escorts, no other inmates, no staff presence. The silence was suffocating. It felt like something forbidden, something wrong, something everyone knew shouldn't be happening. Before we dive deeper, I want your take. Should a high-profile inmate ever be allowed access to restricted areas without documented supervision? Tell me in the comments. And if you want more forensic-level breakdowns like this, subscribe to The Hidden Evidence and turn on all notifications so you never miss these intense updates. Now let's get back to it. That first clip set the internet on fire. TikTok detectives froze the frame where Diddy's hand brushed the top button of his jacket, analyzing whether he was signaling someone off-screen. YouTube threads debated the shadow shifting to his left. Twitter exploded with theories. Why is he alone? Who filmed this? Where's the staff? But the real panic didn't happen online. It happened inside Fort Dix. Late on the night of November 23rd, supervisors were called back into the facility without explanation. The warden initiated a staff-only internal lockdown, the kind normally triggered by suspected employee corruption, not inmate misconduct. Doors slammed. Radios hissed. Officers whispered behind closed blinds. But the second clip, the one that dropped on November 24th, that's the one that pushed everything from confusion into open crisis. Diddy walking down the chapel hallway, smiling, almost gliding. No cuffs, no escorting officer shadowing his steps. He slipped into a dim corner and leaned towards someone standing just out of view. That movement alone sparked a storm of speculation. A private conversation? A smuggled device? A meeting arranged by staff? Why was he there? Who was he talking to? And most importantly, why wasn't any of it logged? Inside the prison, this clip wasn't just a problem, it was a nuclear blast. The angle was too clean. No shaking, no hurried positioning. Whoever recorded it wasn't hiding. They were standing still, steady, confident. That meant one thing. This wasn't inmate filmed. This came from somewhere higher, someone with access, someone with clearance, someone who wasn't afraid of being caught. By November 25th, multiple federal agencies were already on the phone. Washington wanted answers. Oversight committees wanted explanations. The Bureau of Prisons wanted to know how two silent videos could exist without any internal record. But Fort Dix had nothing. No log entries, no escort sheets, no body cam footage, no documented movement. According to the official system, Diddy had never entered the media library that day. He had never passed through the chapel hallway. He had never stopped in that corner. Yet the footage proved otherwise. That was the moment everything began accelerating. By the 27th, national media had picked up the story. Headlines questioned the integrity of the facility. Legal analysts demanded accountability. Former inmates spoke out, explaining how impossible it was to walk alone in those corridors without immediate staff intervention. The pressure mounted, social media swarmed, hashtags trended globally, and the more the world analyzed those silent clips, the more the federal system felt the walls closing in. Meanwhile, Judge Subramanian, sitting quietly in his SDNY chambers, watched the escalation with growing concern. Not because of conspiracy theories or internet noise, but because the footage created one undeniable, catastrophic implication. A breach of confinement integrity involving a high-profile inmate serving a 50-month federal sentence. A breach the prison could not explain. A breach the public viewed as corruption. And public trust is something federal judges cannot ignore. He studied the footage over and over, not as a viewer, but as a man sworn to uphold the credibility of the court. If Diddy was wandering into restricted rooms without authorization, the sentence itself, his sentence, had not been respected. The system carrying out his punishment had failed. And when a sentence collapses in practice, the responsibility falls back on the judge who issued it. By December 1st, pressure had reached a boiling point. Reporters camped outside SDNY. Politicians demanded intervention. Officials from the Bureau of Prisons delivered briefings that answered nothing. Inside Fort Dix, officers walked with stiff, nervous precision. Supervisors braced for interrogations. Administrators whispered that something massive was coming, and they were right, because in the early hours of Tuesday, December 2nd, Judge Subramanian made a decision almost unheard of in modern federal practice, a decision that sent shockwaves through the entire system. He ordered an emergency hearing. For that same morning, no delay, no waiting for Wednesday's docket, no shielding behind routine. Shawn "Diddy" Combs was to be transported to Manhattan immediately, and that order, issued quietly on a cold December dawn, was the moment everything irreversible began. By the time the emergency order reached the Fort Dix command office, the prison was already awake in a way it hadn't been in years. Officers moved like they were operating under a silent alarm, controlled, tense, bracing for something they couldn't name but could feel in the air. The warden, pale under the fluorescent lights, walked the corridors with clipped urgency. He didn't speak unless necessary. He didn't make eye contact. He didn't ask for opinions. The footage had placed a stain on the facility, one that couldn't be scrubbed away with shifting blame or internal memos. Someone inside this prison had failed and someone else had captured it. What nobody knew, at least not yet, was how deeply the judge's decision cut through the system. Emergency hearings aren't just rare, they're almost unthinkable. They mean something fundamental has cracked. And in this case, that crack didn't just run through the prison, it ran through the credibility of confinement itself. Inside the administrative wing, officers reviewed the leaked clips again and again, hoping to notice something they'd missed the previous 9 days. But each viewing only made things worse. The lighting in the media library clip was too even, the camera angle too stable. Someone had stood there on purpose, someone who knew the blind spots, someone who wasn't afraid of getting caught in the act. And the chapel hallway video, if anything, was even more unsettling. The shadowed silhouette Diddy leaned toward never stepped into frame. They lingered just outside the edge, as if deliberately avoiding exposure. Even the still images failed to produce clarity. The figure remained a mystery, too tall to be an inmate, too still to be startled, too steady to be accidental. Every officer who watched the footage felt a quiet chill, not because of what was visible, but because of everything the camera didn't show. No sound, no context, no reason. Just a conversation that broke the rules, filmed by someone who moved like a ghost. Around 6:40 a.m., footsteps echoed through the secure housing unit. The marshals had arrived. Their presence alone changed the air. Marshals don't enter the complex unless something has shifted from internal concern to federal urgency. And when they request immediate access to an inmate at dawn, there is no denying the severity. Doors clanged open one by one as the escort team approached Diddy's cell. Inside, he sat awake on his mattress. He hadn't slept. He hadn't spoken. He knew something had been coming since the night the first video surfaced, but he hadn't expected it to move like this, fast, cold, unstoppable. When the officers stopped at his door, nobody offered an explanation. They didn't need to. The metal key scraping into the lock said enough. The lead marshal stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "Stand up," he said. That was all. No briefing, no accusation. No hint of what awaited him on the other side of the building. Just the command and the silence that followed. Diddy rose slowly, every muscle tight with dread. He extended his hands on instinct. The cuffs locked around his wrist with a cold finality. The waist chain followed, then the leg restraints. Each metallic click echoed off the concrete like a reminder whatever was happening wasn't routine. Even the officers' behavior confirmed it. They were stiff, careful, watchful. Not because they feared he'd resist, but because they understood the gravity of what they were doing. This wasn't a disciplinary move. This wasn't a transfer. This was something deeper, something irreversible. As they escorted him through the corridor, inmates pressed against their windows, breath fogging the glass as they watched in eerie silence. No taunts, no shouts, no jokes. Everyone sensed that this was far beyond a punishment or a hearing. Emergency morning extractions meant only one thing. Disaster was coming for somebody. The cold morning air slapped Diddy's face as he stepped onto the transport bay. A black Marshall van waited, engine already running, exhaust curling into the winter air. This wasn't a bus. This wasn't a group. This wasn't protocol. This was the kind of vehicle reserved for high-risk movements, high-pressure situations, moments when the government couldn't afford a mistake. He ducked inside, the chains rattling softly as he settled onto the steel bench. The ride toward Manhattan felt endless. No conversation, no explanations. Only the low hum of the engine and the murmur of radio static. Through the reinforced window, the road stretched forward like a tunnel toward fate. Diddy stared at the blurred scenery, but his mind wasn't on the outside world. It was on the two clips he had replayed in his head 1,000 times. He remembered the feel of the library carpet under his shoes. He remembered adjusting his jacket. He remembered leaning into the chapel corner, whispering just loud enough for the figure beside him to hear. He remembered how harmless those moments felt. What he didn't remember was the camera. He didn't remember anyone holding a device. He didn't remember being recorded. The weight of that realization pressed on him like a stone. When the van finally reached Manhattan, chaos waited outside. Media trucks lined the curb. Reporters clustered behind police tape, shouting questions that carried through the metal walls of the van. Cameras flashed and burst the moment the marshals opened the door. The fury of attention hit like a wave. Voices collided. Is your sentence being reviewed? Did you know you were being filmed? Why were you in restricted areas? Do you deny the footage is real? He didn't lift his head. He couldn't. The marshals closed in around him, forming a protective wedge as they pushed through the crowd. The courthouse doors swallowed them whole. Inside, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Quiet, cold, heavy. Every official moved with clipped efficiency, as if the building itself knew something monumental was unfolding. He was taken to a holding cell, the kind reserved for inmates awaiting emergency review. The concrete bench was cold beneath him as he sat, hands trembling slightly in his lap. His breath felt short, controlled, pressed into quiet bursts. Minutes turned into something without shape, either too long or too fast to understand. Then the door opened. It's time. He stood. The chains rattled. The hallway stretched before him like a tunnel carved from tension. Every step grew heavier, every echo louder, every breath more deliberate. When he entered the courtroom, the silence hit him like a wall. Reporters leaned forward. Prosecutors sat rigid. Prison officials avoided eye contact. The judge remained still, posture iron straight, face carved with a seriousness that made Diddy's chest tighten. He didn't need to hear a word. The look in the judge's eyes told him everything. This wasn't a meeting. This wasn't a warning. This wasn't a procedural review. Something deeper was about to be decided. And the leaked footage was the reason he was standing there in chains. The courtroom felt like a sealed chamber the moment Diddy stepped inside, a space where even the air seemed held in suspension. Not a whisper, not a shuffle, not a single breath broke the tension. Every pair of eyes locked onto him as though he were the epicenter of a national storm. The prosecutors sat with their backs straight, a stack of documents so thick it looked like it had been compiled over years instead of days. Prison officials sat behind them, shoulders tight, faces drawn, each one silently fearing what would come next. Reporters filled the gallery, pens ready, cameras rolling. Even the federal observers from Washington looked unsettled, their presence a sign that this wasn't just a hearing, this was a reckoning. Diddy lowered his head as his chains rattled softly. He didn't want to look at the judge, but eventually his eyes lifted on instinct. Judge Subramanian sat at the bench, posture rigid, expression carved from stone. He didn't blink. He didn't shift. He simply stared, not at the celebrity, not at the legend, but at the inmate whose leaked footage had thrown the system into chaos. There was no anger in his eyes, no frustration, just a calm, chilling finality. The judge opened the file in front of him with slow precision. The sound of the paper edges brushing together echoed like a warning. He spoke without raising his voice, yet the words carried through the room with the weight of something irreversible. "Mr. Combs," he began, "this court has reviewed the footage released on November 23rd and November 24th. The clerk tapped a key. And then the footage appeared on the courtroom screens. The first frame, the media library, Diddy adjusting his jacket under bright overhead lights. Alone. Completely alone. No officer, no restraints. A restricted room. A low wave of murmurs rippled through the gallery before the judge held up a hand and restored silence instantly. He continued with a steady tone. This room requires supervision. The Bureau of Prisons confirms no such supervision occurred. There is no record of your movement, no documentation, no escort logs, no explanation." The second frame lit up next. The chapel hallway, Diddy walking freely, smiling, hands loose at his sides. No officer within sight. The timestamp in the corner flickered like a signature of misconduct. Then the pause the moment he drifted into the dark edge of the wall, leaning towards someone invisible to the camera. Just out of frame, just beyond identification. The silence in the courtroom deepened. The footage didn't need sound to speak. The images said everything. The judge's voice tightened. "This interaction is of particular concern. No staff member, no inmate, no supervisor has stepped forward to account for it. The Bureau of Prisons cannot explain it. And in federal custody, Mr. Combs, unexplained movements of this nature are unacceptable." A prosecutor rose. Her tone was crisp, clinical, unforgiving. She outlined the public reaction, the frenzy online, the trending hashtags, the reporters demanding answers, the statements from former inmates about how impossible these movements were. She explained how the footage, though silent, had created a rupture in institutional trust. How millions now believed the system was either negligent or corrupt. How credibility had been shaken at every level. Screenshots of posts appeared on the monitors. Millions of views. Comments accusing the system of favoritism. National headlines speculating about internal leaks, staff involvement, and failures of confinement integrity. The judge watched silently, his expression never shifting. Then came the testimony from prison officials. Their voices trembled. Their answers were incomplete. They admitted the footage wasn't authorized, that they had no record of Diddy entering the media library, that no escort had taken him through the chapel hall, that no officer claimed responsibility. Their account wasn't just weak, it was damning. The courtroom atmosphere thickened with something close to disbelief. Diddy's heart hammered in his chest. Each admission hit him like a blow, even though he'd lived those moments himself. He felt his breath shorten. His hands shook lightly in the restraints. He hadn't expected this. Not all of this. Not every detail of those two silent clips turning into a storm powerful enough to drag him into the center of a federal collapse. The judge leaned forward, fingers interlocked. The overhead lights carved hard shadows along his jawline. His next words came slow, deliberate, like each one carried the weight of a ruling that would echo far beyond this room. "Mr. Combs," he said, "your original 50-month sentence was issued on the assumption that you would be held under strict supervision and within standard confinement protocol. These videos show otherwise." Diddy swallowed hard, throat tight. The judge continued. "This footage raises grave concerns about the integrity of your confinement. It raises questions about staff involvement, internal misconduct, and the possibility of special treatment." He paused, letting the room feel the impact. "And when such questions threaten the public's confidence in the justice system, this court is obligated to act decisively." Diddy's knees weakened. His breath faltered. His gaze flickered between the screens, the judge and the courtroom floor. He knew something terrible was coming. He could feel it, but he couldn't stop it. Not now. Not after these images had gone viral, dissected, magnified into symbols of institutional collapse. The judge raised a stack of printed screenshots. One by one, he lifted them. "This image," he said, holding the first, Shows unauthorized access to a restricted area. Another. This captures you moving without escort, without logging, without approval. The third. And this last frame, this is the most troubling. A private, undocumented, unmonitored interaction, silent, hidden, beyond protocol. Reporters lean forward. Prosecutors exchange subtle nods. Even the federal observers tensed in their seats. Diddy's eyes blurred. His breath trembled. His stomach twisted with dread. The judge lowered the photos and placed both hands on the bench. In light of this evidence, he said quietly, and in light of the national impact of these videos, this court must now determine whether your current sentence remains appropriate. Diddy froze. Everything, the courtroom, the people, the lights, seemed to blur and distort. This court finds, the judge continued, that it does not. A sharp gasp cut through the gallery. Then silence reclaimed the room like a tidal wave. Diddy's body swayed. The marshals shifted closer, prepared to steady him. The judge reached for the final document, a sealed order. "Mr. Combs," he said, voice firm, unwavering, "this court hereby replaces your 50-month sentence with a life sentence, effective immediately." The words crashed into Diddy like a physical impact. His knees buckled. His vision fractured into streaks of light. His breath broke into silent gasps. He shook violently as tears ran down his face. The marshals caught him by both arms, holding him upright as he collapsed internally under the weight of reality. The room remained frozen. The judge added the final blow. "You will not be granted the right to appeal. This ruling is final." Diddy's entire world shattered in an instant. He didn't hear the reporters whispering. He didn't see the officials exchanging looks of disbelief. He didn't notice the cameras capturing his breakdown. All he felt was the cold certainty that his life had been rewritten by 2 silent clips and a single December morning. The judge struck the gavel. "This hearing is adjourned." The echo of that sound followed Diddy long after he was taken away in chains. A sound that sealed his fate forever.